Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah. I'm going to be talking today about adolescence, but I'm also going to be talking about parenting and how parenting was very different from a generation or two ago. And I'm going to be talking about a fact of child and human psychology that I think is real important for understanding a lot of the behavior that you get. And last, I'm going to be talking about a particular suggestion that can be real useful in just dealing with kids day to day. But let me start by saying I'm a psychologist. I went to school in New York City. Both my kids were born in New York City, but when they were Margaret was a couple months old, Nick wasn't even yet 2, we moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, where I got a job at a child guidance clinic. And I mention all of this because when they got to be teenagers, I had already been in practice seeing teenagers and families for a good 10 years, and I thought I was pretty competent, and that this was going to be no big deal. You know, my kids, no problem at all. It didn't quite work out that way, and I'm mentioning this because there are certain things that you can only understand if you have been the parent of a teenager. And I will give you a specific example, which is Margaret's 2 years younger than Nick, so my kids hit adolescence more or less around the same time. And once they got to be teenagers, I said to myself that there were certain absolute outside limits past which they would not go. And I think me and my wife are a little more liberal maybe than some parents, so let's say the absolute outside limits past which my kids would not go was about maybe out here. And then they got to be teenagers, and wouldn't you know it, the absolute outside limits ended up somewhat out here. And the thing that only parents of teenagers can understand, and I say this quite seriously, is the answer to the question, how come? How come if me and my wife knew so much about it and how come they ended up so much further out than I had imagined? And the answer, which only parents of teenagers can understand, is, I don't know. Because what they do is they wear you down. I won 13 battles and I only gave an inch on the 14th. But it can be being the parent of a teenager can be a very humbling experience. Parenting today, one hears people say, I never would have talked to my parents that way. And I think there is a recognition that, and this now goes back over more than a generation, that there has been a dramatic change in the way children behave, especially with their parents then. And it's not just each generation saying, oh, kids today, the world is going to hell. There really has been this dramatic, major change in child behavior, the gist of which is kids today, in a way that really didn't exist a couple generations ago, talk back much more, and are not as immediately obedient as people were in the past. And parents looking at their kids, they say, I must be doing something wrong. I don't know what my parents were doing right, but I never would have talked to my mother that way. And the grandparents standing there and saying, yes, you just know, kids, you have all these fancy ideas about parenting, but it doesn't seem to work, does it? And you say, I don't know, maybe it's true. But the fact is that the main reason that kids today talk back more and are not as immediately obedient is not because parents are doing something wrong, it's because of something they're doing which is right. And this has to do with the fact that two facts that all of you know, but for some reason, people don't put these two things together quite maybe as I think they need to be. And what it is that there has been a revolution going back a couple generation or two in parenting practice. And what that revolution is a historic revolution in parenting practice. I can describe real quickly. I'm going to tell a little story. I am a 7-year-old boy, and I'm coming home from school. And I'm going to actually correct myself on this, that one of the things that happens is that kid comes to school, I'm getting ahead of myself, kid comes to school, and on his face is the clear imprint of a hand. And his teacher says to him, Jimmy, where'd you get those marks? And the kid says, My mom hit me. In every state in the United States today, by state law, that teacher has to report that to child abuse authorities. 50, 60 years ago, a kid comes into school and in his face is a clear imprint of a hand. And the teacher says, what happened? And the kid says, my mom hit me. 50, 60 years ago, there were no laws or rules about anything about child abuse. And the teacher said, not that all teachers would have said this, but they might have, I'll bet you deserved it. Because there really there wasn't anything that was very different, which is that the more harsh forms of punishment, hard smacks on the face, getting out a belt, or a switch, or a stick, or something like that, people used to do it then, but we don't do it now. And that's a good thing. And I think we all would agree it was based on the idea, and let me tell a real quick story, I think most people would agree with. Mother with her 7-year-old son and 5-year-old daughter. The 7-year-old boy punches his sister. The mother goes over to the son and says, stop hitting your sister. I said, stop hitting your sister. There, that'll teach him. Well, not so many years ago, people say, that's right, that'll teach him. Well, it will teach him. We now know, and I think most would agree, we know that it teaches him not to hit his sister when his mother's looking. But that in regard to, and I think this is my main point on this, in regard to the mother teaching the kid, I think we would all agree that the kid himself, if he's raised by this mother and that's part of her normal child raising practice, that he is more, not less likely himself to be a hitter for having been hit by his mother. I think we now believe that it's not just what you teach a kid, but how you treat them that determines how they're going to act. And I think this is sort of taken for granted. But point of fact is that the idea that fear is not such a big piece of child raising as it was in the past. A lot of people aren't so sure. They feel, well, maybe, fear, at least it certainly had better behaved kids, and I don't think there's any question better behaved kids at home. And I think most people wouldn't really question that. But regardless, this is what we have. We now have a generation going on of kids who are not afraid of their parents. I'm a believer that that was a real good thing, that it was excellent, it was something that made the world be a better place for having this be a rule about treating kids. But regardless, this is what we have. But there was a little problem. The little problem was, how do human children who are not afraid of their parents behave? Think about it. This was brand new. Nobody had done this. This was like a whole new idea of child raising. How do human children who are not afraid of their parents behave? We now know. A fact known by everybody in this audience is that if you say to a human child, Jimmy, would you please take that cup into the kitchen? We now know that human children who are not afraid of their parents then say, why? And the parent says, because I'm asking you to. And we now know that human children who are not afraid of their parents then say, but it's not my cup. The parent says, take the cup into the kitchen. And the kid says, okay, why doesn't Jennifer have to do everything? I'm stuck doing it. It's a fact that, and when you think about it, that parenting today is more difficult than it was in the past. That we removed the number one behavior control, the number one parenting leverage with kids' behavior. And what would you expect? This was something that we now know and know pretty well. Fortunately, this is not quite the disaster that it may seem, because of a particular fact of child and human psychology that I'm now going to talk about, that puts the sometimes bratty kid behavior in a rather more benign light. And this has to do with this particular fact of child and human psychology that I'm now going to describe. I am a 7-year-old boy, and I'll do it with one hand. I am a 7-year-old boy, and I am coming home from school. And this is the door to my house, and this is the outside, this is the inside. Here is a wall, and on this wall, placed lovingly at exactly the right height for my cute little 7-year-old hand, is a coat hook. I am now coming home. I come home, I take off my jacket. Maybe I'm going to do this not taking off the jacket because it's tougher one-handed. But so I'll have to pretend that I did that. I'm coming in the house, I'm carrying my jacket. Here is the coat hook, okay? Here is my hand holding the coat, which I've just taken off, and I drop it on the floor. And my mother, who happens to be home, says, Stephen, how many times do I have to tell you to hang up your coat? Which is, I don't know, a lot, I don't know. Next day, same kid coming home from school, comes in the house, opens the door, comes in, takes off his coat. Here's the coat hook. But on this particular day, his mother, who had just yelled at him the day before, is standing right here. And this is what they all do. He comes in the house, takes off his coat. Here's his hand, here's the coat hook. And he says, hi, Mom. How many times will his mother have to tell him to hang up his coat? Answer, if he's 7, he's probably in 2nd grade. They graduate high school, 12th grade. So that's 10 times maybe 200. Is it true that with most kids, boys and girls, even to the last day of high school, that they come into the house and throw their coat on the floor? The answer for those of you who haven't had high school seniors is yes, they even do it to that point. The point of this story is the second half. The second half, it goes back to the 7-year-old kid, and he goes to school, and he's in 2nd grade, and in school he has a cubby, and in his cubby is a little coat hook, and every day, without anybody saying anything to him, he neatly hangs his coat in the cubby. Not all 2nd graders do that, but many do who just as reliably never do it at home. I mention this because it's a simple example of a phenomenon that all of you know about, which is that we really have, us, our kids, teenagers, really have 2 different modes of operating, really almost like 2 selves. We kind of have our at-home self that just wants to unwind, be fed now, just wants to relax. It's our time and our kids' time where we get sort of the deep nurturing that we all like. Another part of it is, and I talk about these, that there's sort of this home self. I talk about it as the baby self. It also has a counterpart, the mature self, but baby selves are all the same. They don't vary from person to person. They don't differ over time, which is all baby selves want to be fed now. And the other characteristic of baby selves is that they will tolerate 0 stress. When I say 0, I mean that. And if you're dealing with your kid and you're getting certain kind of behavior, it's only if you understand about the existence of the baby self, and that's who you're dealing with, that can explain some of the things you get, which is, for example, you can say to your kid, would you please move the glass over there? And the kid argues for 25 minutes. You say, excuse me, how difficult would it have been to move the cup just over there? Well, if they're dealing with a baby self, anything that a baby self does not feel like doing is more than what a baby self will do. There's this other side, the mature self, which goes out into the world and functions at a completely different, more mature level. Mature selves will tolerate stress to work towards a goal. They can delay gratification. They have self-control. It really is this more mature side of us and of our kids. And these 2, baby self and mature self, operate in the course of a day very much like a shifting of gears. You can actually feel it. Let's say, talking about me, that on a particular day I was really rather stressful because I had to deal with a number of difficult clients, and during that time, but at all times, I was professional and mature, even though it was really rather difficult. But I am now coming home at the end of my did I mention that it was a difficult day? At the end of my rather difficult day, and I'm coming into the house, and even as I get in the house, you can feel it. It's like your body essences kind of flow away, and I stagger to the couch, where if I am lucky, the remote is within arm's length, because if it's not, I may need assistance. And couples know about this, because you may have one person who's been home the whole day and hasn't talked to an adult human the whole time, but you have this other person who's coming home and maybe has talked to too many adult humans. But there's a problem because the one who's home wants to tell the other person about their day, but the other person is now switching from their mature self mode to their baby self mode. And in case you didn't know it, listening requires patience. and baby selves have none. What a lot of people do is that they have, in effect, a baby self unwinding time, and then they get to hear about the day. Baby selves are good. It is only in the baby self mode that our kids get the deep nurturing that we all need. It's without that, our life would be way, way too stressful. And our kids need it, we like it, we want to have a certain place for our baby self, for us to unwind, for them to unwind. And I can remember when my kids were little, I say this quite seriously, that I loved them a lot, but there was a special time that I loved them the most, which was when they were asleep, because they were so cute. But I can remember, and you've had the same experience, which is that there are these times, there's this wonderful time that they are actually in bed. And now I have time for my baby self time. And it's just stupid stuff. It's just things, it's what we feel like doing, which is why, and we're very protective of it, which is why it's such a problem when, I'm here and I'm just trying to begin my little baby self time. And, can Grandma Edith, who died, see me in my room? No, go to bed. But I can hear her breathing. Go to bed. And you can feel it. I just want this time for myself. Anyway, baby selves are good. They're cute. They're funny. They're how we get nurtured. It's how they get nurtured. I think of it very much like a boxer between rounds. That you go out into the world, deal with the world in your mature self mode, and then come back to the corner and collapse and get re-energized to be able to go out and face. But at any rate, as I said, baby selves are necessary. They're good. But there's a little problem with baby selves, which I'm going to be talking about most of the rest of the day, which is that when baby selves are not getting their way, they can be rather less than cute. Now let me ask a question, which is, and think about it, if it is true, as I am saying, that it really is important for kids to be able to have their baby self side come out, at least a certain amount of their childhood, wouldn't you rather, if there was a place that the baby self did come out, the unpleasant side of the baby self, wouldn't you rather that it be at home and with you rather than out in the world? Fact is, you don't have a choice. A fact known to everybody in this room is that just the physical presence of a parent brings out the baby self in a child. Kid is over at a friend's house, parent shows up. Mom, can we go to McDonald's? I'm sorry, sweetheart, we're not going to have time. But you said we'd go to McDonald's. I didn't say, yes, you did. You promised. I didn't promise. Yes, you did. You do this all the time. You make promises. You do all this. You do this all the time. And the mother of the other kid says, I don't understand. He was so well behaved until you showed up. And they both conclude incorrectly, oh, he must be tired. Wrong. Had the parent showed up an hour later, an hour earlier, same thing would have happened. Just the physical presence of the parent brings out the baby self of the kid. But this then gets to the first important question about baby self, mature self, which is, which of these two, mature self or baby self, is the better indicator of who a child really is? And let me tell a story. Teenage girl. Not all teenage girls are like this. Most probably aren't, but some definitely are. With her parents, really unpleasant. They ask her to do something, she always gives them a hard time. She always has this attitude all the time. And when they talk to the girl, when the parents talk to the girl, she does a lot of deep breathing and eye rolling. But this is just the way she is. Parents go away for the weekend. Girl goes to stay at the home of a friend. Parents return. 2 weeks later, the mother of the girl runs into the mother of the friend. And the mother of the friend says, you must be so proud of your Elizabeth. And the mother of the girl says, Elizabeth whom? But this is really what happens, that in other people's houses there is this other level of behavior, much better, that often will go on that you don't get to see at home. I want to correct something that I said. I said that parent brings out the baby self in the child. The truth is that anyone who is in a day-to-day nurturing child care role tends to bring out baby self, and others don't. So that if you have grandparents in Minnesota who they get to see once or twice a year, they're going to tend to get the mature self version. If it's grandparents who are involved in a lot of day-to-day child care, they'll tend to get the baby self. I mention this because there's an important kind of side thing from this, which is that in a relationship where you have two parents, it can often be that one of them is involved in a lot of day-to-day child care and one is not. And what can happen is that the same parent with the same kid doing the same behavior gets different results. Mother and her son. Clarence, stop playing with the lamp switch. I'm not hurting it. I said, Clarence, stop playing with the lamp switch. I'm just experimenting. Clarence, stop. You're yelling at me. I'm not yelling at you. Meanwhile, in the other room, the father, disturbed again by the bickering between his son and wife, puts down his newspaper, goes into the room, and says to his son, Clarence, stop playing with the lamp switch. Whereupon Clarence stops. And then the father says what probably has caused at least a few divorces. Suzanne, you're just not tough enough with the kids. To which he says, I'll show you what's tough. But my point being that you can have two parents, and one who, you can do two parents doing exactly the same thing and yet getting different results. Going back to the girl who stayed at the friend's house, and this really is what happens more often than not. The mother of the friend says she was very polite. She offered to help, which they really do in other people's houses. And the thing that kills parents of teenagers, she's such an interesting girl. And they describe how at one of the meals she talked really very intelligently about how the continuing discord in the Middle East is unquestionably going to have continued effect in destabilizing oil prices. And the mother returns to her daughter, tells her the story, and says, why can't you be that way with us? We're the ones who sacrifice. We're the ones who've given up so much. Why can't you? Which the girl says, because you're mean, which is to say they're getting the baby self. Which of these two is the better indicator of a child? The baby self, which for the most part you get to see, or the mature self, which mainly you kind of hear about, because apparently there's a child with the exact same name as yours and looks the same, but the behavior doesn't fit at any rate. Which of these two is the better indicator of who a child is and who they're going to be when they grow up? Answer, absolutely, the mature self. And there's a very strong proof of this, which is, in the vast majority of cases, not all, this is what happens. That they get to the teenage years, they get to the end of their teenage years, and they change. And it really can seem like a miracle. And this happens not because the parents finally shaped up the kid. It happens because the kid moved into the next developmental stage, which is young adulthood. And at that point, everything changes, and they can start being nice to you and seem to be saying a lot of things that you'd been saying to them earlier. What does this mean? It means that you don't have to worry too much about somehow shaping them up in the last month of high school. Buster, you just listen to me. If you think for a minute that you can behave the way you do towards me and your mother, well, think again. To which, because you know what? You will never be able to get married. You will never be able to hold down a job. Well, just think about that. And the kid says, gosh, Dad, I feel bad because you didn't tell me this before, and I would have, obviously it makes good sense. I just feel bad for you and Mom. I apologize. I'll certainly change. That's not the way it works. And a lot of it is in fact, a lot of what you've already put inside, and it's there, and it does bear fruit, but sometimes you don't always get to see it. This gets to a story that is maybe one of the most important stories that I have. Because sometimes you can look at your kid and you can say, why am I even trying? Why am I trying? Because it isn't getting any kind of results. Some kids are easy, some kids are more difficult. The story is about my son, Nick. When Nick was 7 or 8, it got to be his job that on Wednesdays, when he would come home from school, he would bring the 2 empty trash cans from the curb into the garage. And I would bring out the full trash cans on Wednesdays on my way to work. And what would happen would be that Wednesdays when I was coming home from work, without fail, the trash cans were still there. And what would happen would be sometimes I'd call to Nick and he would come down and he would bring the trash can in. But a lot of times it was so much easier just to bring the trash can in myself. I know that's bad parenting, but at any rate, this went on for years. And this is a completely true story. One time, and I think it was either 14 or 15, it was a Wednesday evening, I came home and the trash cans weren't there. And I immediately assumed, as anybody would in the circumstance, oh my God, somebody stole our trash cans. And I happened to look, and this is a totally true story, I happened to look in the garage and there were the trash cans. And I called to Nick and I said, Nick, you put out the trash cans. And he looked at me like I was a total idiot and he said, yeah. I said, Nick, you have never brought in the trash cans in your life. To which he said, yeah, it's my job. And from then on, more or less, Nick brought the trash cans in. And what I think happened, and I do think this is the correct interpretation, is that he matured. He matured that he got to the point that as soon as he got home from school, he didn't immediately have to shift over to his baby self mode, run inside, get something to eat, turn on the TV, or play video games. He matured to the point that he could stay in his mature self mode the extra 30 seconds that it would take to bring in 2 trash cans, and they weren't the heavier metal kind, the lighter place, not a distance to there, maybe to the stairs over there. At any rate, and from then on, that's basically what happened. But the importance of this is that it says that some of the behavior that you get, that you sort of despair of, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stick. That this is that your kid is basically a good kid. That you've been doing the right thing all along. Now, what this leads to is, so what's the problem with the baby self? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that your kid is going to grow up to be a bad kid. Mainly, the biggest problem with the baby self is that it's unpleasant. Fortunately, there is something that you can do that can make a significant difference in the amount of baby self fussing behavior that you get. And this can really make a giant difference in the day-to-day parenting of your kid. What this is, it goes back to the baby self. Now, I said that all baby selves are the same. I said they want to be fed now. They tolerate no stress. There is a third characteristic of baby selves, all baby selves, our kids' baby selves. And this is that when a baby self is not getting its way, it will do everything it can to get you to change your mind. But failing to do that, failing to get you to change your mind, the baby self will go on forever. And I mean forever. Girl comes to her father. Dad, can you drive me over to Stephanie's house? We have this history diorama that we're working on. We really need to do it tonight, which I want you to listen to what the father says. And we said that we think that I've said that we believe that kids will be the way they're treated. So this father's always been reasonable and kind. I want you to listen to how he talks to his daughter. He says, gosh, sweetheart, you've been sick. It's a school night. And you were out last night. So I'm sorry, honey, but no. And we would assume, because his father's always been nice and kind and reasonable, that she's going to be reasonable too, and she'll probably say something like, my congestion's still there from the cold, so don't worry about it, Dad. Thanks for listening. I mean, no, that's not what happens. What happens is he says, but Dad, you don't understand. I have to go over to Stephanie's. You don't have to go. Yes, I do, Dad. I have to go over to Stephanie's. And they go on for a little while. And then the father says, what I'm saying is exactly the correct thing to say. He says, no, I'm sorry, and I do not want to hear any more about it. And then he turns to go. But if he has a typical teenage daughter, he is going to hear more about it. And 2, if he goes, she will follow. And 3, should he actually go into a room and close and lock the door, she's going to follow him, face pressed against the door. Dad, you didn't give me a good reason. Dad. And then we appear. We say, excuse me, can we ask you a couple questions? What? Do you think your father's going to change his mind? No, he's an idiot. Well, then why are you standing here with your face pressed against the door in this ridiculous position? To which, if she's honest, she'll say, I don't know. Because this is the part that you'll recognize, which is at that moment, she is in the clutches of her baby self. And the way baby selves are, if they are not getting their way, They will not let go. They cannot move on. They are stuck. They hold on and hold on. What baby cells hate more than anything else is to separate. And if you can picture that, they just will go on and on. You can see it in adult arguments, especially with people who we're close to, where our baby selves tend to come out more, or the baby self inside of us who cannot move on, who cannot separate, will say, I have to get her to see my way. I have to get her to understand. We have to get some resolution to this. We can't just leave this hanging like this, because it's not fair. I have to get her to see my way. And what can happen is, if both baby selves are too strong, where one or the other should have separated and they don't, the arguments can end up going to serious bad places, which leads to, so what do you do? Answer. When you are going against the wants of a baby self, say what you have to say, do what you have to do, and then end, because they will not. And what this translates into, when you're going against what your kids want, once you have truly decided, you want to decide fast, you want to stand firm, and the third one, which I'll talk much more about, which is because it's a tough one, once you have truly decided, you want to disengage as fast as you can. Decide fast. If you're listening to your kid and going against what he or she wants, and you decide to change your mind, that's excellent. That's excellent, because it says to your kid that you're listening, that you're flexible. So that's, it's not something that is such a bad thing at all. But there's a little problem, which is that it turns out that past an early point when you're making an unpopular decision with your kid, anything further that you're talking about just sort of deteriorates into pleading. So that, how do you know when you should disengage? Answer, and I say this quite seriously, when you can feel your blood pressure going up, and it's just getting into the case pleading stage. Because think about it. How many people have ever had the experience of making an unpopular decision with their kid and then talking reasonably for like 25 minutes or half an hour, and at the end of which the kid finally says, I can see where you're coming from. You and Mom always say I can't always get my way, but you can't have everything, and thanks for listening. That's not what happens. It'll just go on and on and on. At any rate, so there is a point where you have to learn to cut it off, and if you're not sure, you even say, I'll think about it. Well, what's that supposed to mean? I'm supposed to sit here and wait? You make it remind. It's a firm decision. You say, no, I'll think about it. We'll talk about it later. But at any rate, second, stand firm. The biggest single day-to-day parenting mistake that people could make is if too regularly your child can bully you into changing your mind. That it's going to happen because kids can be very forceful, and there's sometimes you just say, you just go here, or you take $25, I don't care, whatever it is. But that you make that decision, and if it's too frequently you get bullied into it, the problem is obviously that if they're not getting their way, they learn that if they're just haven't persisted hard enough. And with a lot of kids, some kids are easy, but this becomes tricky because there are some kids who you always seem to be in some kind of battles, and you do not fair to you, but especially not fair to your kid, to always be battling them over everything. So you have to make some hard choices. That there's some things I absolutely don't want my kid to do, but there's some kids that I really absolutely don't want my kid to do, and you have to make some differentiation between that, because as I said, you can't always be fighting with them. Last one, once you have truly decided, you want to disengage as fast as you can. This is a tough one, because it's very hard for us not to want to get in the last word. And the way baby selves operate is, not only will they not let go, but they provoke. They custom tailor what they have learned will push your particular buttons. And now let me tell the classic baby self story, which is mother and daughter, teenage daughter. Girl wants a new pair of boots. They argue for a little while, and then the mother says no, and that's it. And the girl has learned from previous experience that when her mother has that particular tone of voice, anything further that the girl is going to say is not going to get her mother to change her mind, and is not going to suck her mother into one of these endless escalating baby self arguments. So I want you to watch what happens. The mother says to her daughter, no, and that's it. And at that point, and I want you to watch what happens, the girl turns to go. Well, if you have ever gone against the wants of your child, and they have turned to go, you have been a brilliantly successful parent. I said that the last thing baby self ever wants is to separate. So if they turn to go, you've been a firm, solid, strong parent and did do very, very well. But there's a little problem, which is baby selves die hard. So even as the girl has turned to go, her baby self, in one last desperate attempt to rehook her mother, mumbles under her breath, bitch. Whereupon, and I'm not saying that the mother did the wrong thing, but you have to understand, if the mother says anything, she's just going to be re-engaging the baby self. And the fact is, I'm a strong believer that if you not to deal with it right at the time, because that's just going to be pouring fuel on the fire. If it's something that you really care about, and you care enough about it, you bring it up later. You go into a later time, you go and you say, heard what you said, I do not want you talking to me that way ever. In this particular case, that's not what the mother didn't wait. But I'm not being critical of the mother, it's just that you have to understand what's going on. Because in this particular case, the mother said, what did you say? And the girl, and this is my whole point, made a full 180-degree turn back. She said nothing, but the baby self inside of her said, yes. And now at that point, again, I'm not criticizing the mother, but the mother now having re-engaged the girl's baby self, the mother says, I do not want you speaking of that way ever. To which now she's re-engaged the girl's baby self, so the baby self will gladly get right back in it. She says, I will talk to you any way I want. This is a free country. At that point, the girl's mother has to disengage because the baby self is now totally hooked her. No, she may not see. No, as long as you live under this roof in this house, you will talk and act as we say. Absolutely not, because they always have an answer. The baby self is very smart, has the same brain. She says, fine. Tricia's mother said that I could live at their house, so I'm gonna call her, and they'll be able to pick me up about half an hour. Can you give me $50 for groceries? At any rate, my contention is that if you actually follow this, which is to say disengaging once you made up your mind, there really is nothing short of going back to the old harsh punishment model that will be anywhere near as effective in cutting down on the back talk at the time and cutting down on the back talk overall. The reason I'm so adamant about it is that I did it with my kids and it worked. I didn't always do it, however, because sometimes they would come at me in a newly creative and maddening way, and even as I'm raving at them about who knows what it is, I'm saying to myself, seriously, I'm saying, this is not how I should be doing it. It's too bad I'm out of control. But the fact is, if you do it, it works, and you find that it reinforces itself. And most parents have an objection to what I'm recommending, and it's an understandable one, it's a reasonable objection, which is, if you're not responding at the time, don't they feel they are getting away with it? And the answer is absolutely not, because all you have to do is see what happens when you do it, which is to say, if you're now walking away, they say, you're not listening to me, you have to listen to me, you're not listening to me. Mom, you're not listening to me. Which is exactly right, because what I'm really saying is, and my actions, not saying this to them, my actions say that until you choose to return to the land of the reasonable, I'm not going to be dealing with you. And it's really, it does absolutely have an effect. As I'll be talking about, it has more of an effect on girls than the guys, because the guys are never there to lead because they're already absent already, because that's what teenage guys do. But at any rate, this applies with parents, it applies with teenagers, it applies with kids, that it really is an effective, and it can be a significant, if you can get yourself to do it, to disengage, once you've truly decided to disengage as fast as you can. Adolescence. Adolescence, definitely things change. And Adolescence, sometimes people you sort of read that adolescence is sort of an invention of the media or something. But what adolescence is a useful developmental concept, because what it is the coming together of a number of major developmental changes all within a relatively short period of time, which is they get new bodies, not just bigger, but they now take on the secondary sex characteristics and they take a completely different look. And most of you probably have experienced, if not with your kid, some other kids, there's someone who's going through their growth spurt and you haven't seen them maybe for 3 or 4 months, and you see this thing and who is this person? I mean, it's really, and every time I see it, I'm always struck by it that there's someone who I've known as a kid and now suddenly this, and they have to get used to it because it is a new body. Second thing, their cognitive changes. They can understand things in conceptual ways they couldn't before. The main place that you see this, and I do remember this, is they start understanding things in much more adult ways. So you have to watch what you're doing and you're talking to another adult, unless you want them to hear, which is fine. But they will, you used to be able to talk over them and they don't get it. This changes, and that's a cognitive difference. Obviously, third change, a huge change, obviously, is they develop sexuality. Not just the ability to reproduce, but they now have sexual feelings, and the world becomes sexualized. And it really changes their life basically forever because of this new added on factor in their lives. There is a fourth change, and it is a purely psychological one that more than anything determines why teenagers act as they do, and especially why they act as they do with parents. And this fourth change, the psychological change, is that as part of normal psychological development, there appears in a kid's head the belief that they no longer are comfortable experiencing themselves as a dependent little kid. They want to see themselves as an independent, adult-like being. Well, that's a good thing because they're going to be going out on their own, and it's not such a bad thing that they develop a certain amount of distance, a certain amount of want to be a little more independent. But there is a little problem, and the problem is they now is no longer acceptable for them to experience themselves as a dependent little kid, but they're this person or persons to whom they have very strong love attachment feelings, namely their parents. And these love attachment feelings don't just disappear, they're now there, except now they are no longer acceptable. And you have the classic situation of adolescence, which I will now describe. I am a 14-year-old boy, and I am sitting on a couch in a room by myself watching television. And I'm having a very good time, and I am very relaxed. But now, coming into the room, saying nothing, is my mother. And immediately, I'm not relaxed, and I would like it if she leaves, which if she does, I'll immediately go back to being relaxed. And this would apply both with guys and girls. If we watched through a one-way mirror, we'd see the kid is real relaxed, parent comes in, they're no longer relaxed, parent leaves, they go back to being relaxed. And this happens just because by their coming in, they bring out the still present love, attachment, dependency feelings. And it's felt like an inner tension. It really is absolutely a feelable physical thing that they couldn't possibly explain, but it's very tangible and very real. Now in this particular case, the mother does a terrible thing. She speaks. She says her son's name, James. And he says, "What?" And she says, "Don't talk to me in that tone of voice." And he says, "What tone of voice?" And they kind of go on from there. Well, think about it. Here's the kid watching TV, real relaxed. He's having his baby supper. He's done all his chores. He's done all his homework. So he really is completely allowed to be completely relaxed. And here, coming into the room, is his mother completely ruining his nice, relaxed time. But not only has she come into the room, but she is staying in the room. And not only is she staying in the room, but she is speaking. And in those circumstances, it is very hard to talk in this kind of tone of voice. But now I am going to turn it into a horror story. Because on this particular day, the mother decides that she wants some quality mother and son time. And so she goes over to the couch where her beloved son is sitting, and she sits down next to him, and she puts her arm around him. And the poor kid is so uncomfortable that he gets up and he leaves. And the mother is devastated. She was just reaching out to her beloved son, and she feels rejected, which she in fact was. And it is a fact that adolescence for parents can be a loss, and kids vary a lot on that, but there are a lot of kids who, they were a big, important, nurturing part of us, and it really can be shutting out from an important, nurturing thing of us that's not there. It comes back, but they're never quite the same huggy pumpkins that they were before. But if there is one thing that I'm going to say about adolescence today, it is as follows, which is, think about what would have happened if the kid maybe, let's say, was 9 or 10, and he's sitting there, and his mother comes and sits down next to him, but now he's 9 or 10, and she puts her arm around him. At 9 or 10, this kid might well have put his head on her shoulder. And let's say that, as usually is the case, that the mother had done nothing wrong, nothing especially wrong between when he was 9 or 10 to when he got to be 14 or 15. He'd done nothing wrong that would explain this transition from being the loving, affectionate little kid to one who really couldn't stand being with the parent. What's that change? The coming of adolescence, which is to say, with the vast majority of teenagers, in some form, they develop a temporary allergy to their parents. And they really do. A lot of kids, they find their parent just being there, their parent's presence, very aggravating. Dad, do you have to breathe that way? And the poor father, who has never been uncomfortable about his breathing, is for the rest of his life. And it really is, as I said, it's a loss. You have let's say I have this kid when he was like 6 or 7, he comes home from school, his mother's over there, says, Mom, you remember my leaf project? Well, it blew away, so I had to borrow some leaves from this kid, Jimmy, but he just gave me crumpled ones, so it really wasn't really particularly fulfilling. Same kid, mother's sitting there, he's coming home from school, but now he's a teenager. He just walks right by her. She says, hello, he doesn't say anything. She says, come back here. What? I want you to tell me about your day. I had lunch, okay? A point about teenagers and a point about the teenage allergy, which, that there is a gender difference that can be just the opposite of what I'm saying, and that's totally normal, but there is no question that there is a guy and girl way, and you'll recognize it, of how they deal with the problem of what do I do about the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings that I have towards my parents. Typical teenage boy turns 14, goes to his room, turns on the stereo in his video game, and comes out for supper and high school graduation. Which is to say, teenage guys' way of dealing with their parents is that dealing with the attachment is they're not there, that they have physical separation. The classic teenage boy deal is they go in their room, they close the door, and there's sometimes big fights over whether they're going to have the door to be locked or not. But the boys really want to set up, and it can feel like a wall. It very, very much can feel like there is a wall that comes down, and that's adolescence. And I was one of I was sort of the classic non-communicative. The sort of joke in my house was that I only had one word that I spoke, and the word was fine, which is in regard to any question, I would give the simplest answer that gives absolutely no information. And I can remember, and this is a true story, that it was later, and I probably was in college at that point, that I can remember sitting in the kitchen talking with my mother and talking for like an hour, and I said, that's odd. I haven't talked to my mother for a long time like this. And it was just that was the end of adolescence, that this happened, and sort of moved on to the next thing. The other thing that teenage boys do is that they know how to be absent even when they're there, which is the classic teenage boy way of talking. The parents say, gosh, we haven't noticed this before. Do you think we should consult a speech pathologist? But there's a little hint on that, which is that the kid is the president of the debate team, so maybe he has this other side of it. Teenage girls, it's actually with teenage girls that the bigger surprise comes, because it's definitely tougher with teenage girls, because teenage girls have a different way of dealing with the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings, which is that they declare their independence moment by moment in your face. And this actually is a paradox, because even though they're more stressful to have around, and they used to bring you lots of these nice I love you mommy and smiley face cards, but now it's quite different. The teenage girls, in comparison to teenage boys, stay in much more emotional contact with their parents than the guys do. And teenage girls can use parents for support in a lot different way than teenage boys, if they have a problem, who they go to is nobody. They don't go to a friend and say, "No, Brian, I haven't been that confident about myself lately. You know, my acne." Just kidding. In fact, and this really has now been true for 10, 15 years, maybe more, that one of the things that I find is an absolute plus in regard to the internet is that teenage guys will have people who they can talk to about things, about their thoughts and about their feelings in a way there really was no avenue for it. And a lot of teenage boys, if not most, have a guy friend, or rather the teenage guy has a girl who is a friend who they talk with and who they communicate with, and actually can talk about things that I don't think there was that much of going in the past. At any rate, this is what goes on. Let me ask a question, which is, if there is this strong thing that's pushing you away, and you can really feel it, I mean, it feels like there's, sort of like a force field that they're, radiating, keep away, how much of this should you respect? My answer is some, but not completely. What I'm going to recommend now does not apply when you're setting a rule or setting a limit. Then you have to do as I've been describing. Say whatever it is you're going to say and then disengage. But this is something in dealing with the sort of day-to-day teenage grumpiness. And the teenagers with their attitude can kind of cast a pall over everything that goes on. And let me describe what I'm talking about when I'm saying how much should you respect the pushing you away. One, I'm a believer in giving teenagers hugs. They hate it. At the same time, they like it a lot. They say, "My parent still loves me. My parent still loves me, even though all the negative stuff that goes on." And they feel, and this actually is what goes on in their head, they say, "My parents are able to transcend a lot of the negative stuff in this love because they love me." And that's a real important thing to teenagers, and that's a powerful thing. And that is exactly as they experience it. I found that with my kids, I did something that I ultimately used to call going against the grain. It was sort of competing melodies, which is to say, they'd be grumpy and I'd be cheerful. And let me describe how this went. I didn't always do this, but I did sometime. The following is partly fictitious, but it was certainly something similar. Son comes down in the morning and says, "What's for breakfast?" I say, "French toast." I say, "I hate French toast." Well, the normal parent response, which is in harmony with the grumpiness, is to say, "Well, you know what? There are a lot of people out in the world who would be very thankful to have the French toast that you have," because that's the typical kind of thing. But all that does is kind of then escalate and set a nice grumpy tone for the whole morning. Why not do something a little different? So kid comes down, son comes down, says, "What's for breakfast?" I say, "French toast." He says, "I hate French toast." But instead of saying that, I say, "You know what? I really like French toast. In fact, French toast is my favorite breakfast food. In fact, I'm going to sing the French toast song. Oh, I love French toast too. I hope you like it too. I'll have two." He says, "Oh my God, my parent's an idiot. I'm a lunatic for a parent." But they like that. I mean, they will laugh, and they will laugh if you can pull it off. It is sort of part of a stance vis-a-vis teenagers, which is, it's kind of a mantra that you say to yourself, not to them. I know that you can't stand me, but I also know that this is just part of a temporary attachment, that you're now allergic, but that it goes away, and that you really do still love me, and you really do care. And the stuff that I do, it's not personal. Yes, it is personal, it's you. No, not only is it not personal, but I love you so much that we can be together and just have a really nice time. Aren't we having a good time? No. But again, it has this message which says that my parent allows at least some time for their affection to me to, again, transcend, it's the best word that I can come up with, what goes on in the day-to-day basis, and it really does make a difference to the kids. At this point, I'm going to stop, but I just want to mention one other point about raising teenagers, which is, and this applies with other kids, but particularly with teenagers, which is people can get in a lot of trouble over rules. And the parents will have a rule and the kid argues and the parent says, counter-argues, and the kid says, that's not fair, you're not reasonable. In fact, you know what? I've already called, I have here a list of all the phone numbers of all the kids in my class, and you can call their parents and you will find that I have the earliest curfew of anybody in my grade. And we'll go on, and so if you can prove that, if they can prove that they're right, does that mean that you then have to change your opinion? The fact is that I'm a believer in it's good to listen, it's good to try and be reasonable, it's good to be flexible, but bottom line is that they're stuck with you, that you're the boss and you're the one who is making the decision. It doesn't mean that you're right. The basis of authority with a teenager is not always on its right, but it's because you're the parent and you try and do what you think is best. But that's something they're going to have to live with. If I'm actually ruining their lives and they'll grow up depressed because they had such a horrible teenage years, friendless because the rules were too strict, I apologize, but probably no, that's not going to happen. At any rate, as I said, adolescence ends. It can seem like a miracle. And what really does happen is that by the end of senior year, if not before, they start saying things back to you that you had been saying to them 2 or 3, you were too lenient with me. That's part of what my problem is. And the famous thing is, older teenage siblings in regard to younger teenage siblings, older teenage siblings are merciless with their parents in terms of the younger teenagers. You don't know what's out there. I do. And a kid actually comes to you and will say, "Do you remember the party that I went to at Evelyn's house when I was 13? Well, you should not have let me go. There were boys, there was some drinking, and her parents were not there." You say, "Excuse me, don't you remember you had Evelyn disguise her voice as her mother? Well, you should not have believed her." At any rate, an ending just to say that if you wonder what's going to happen with my kid, the best judge of that, or the best predictor of that, is really more not so much looking at any particular slice of life, but to look at 2 things, which is, what did you do? And if you can say, well, I basically have been a nice, nurturing parent, tried. No, not all the time, but that was basically what I tried to do as much as I could. And that I was willing, at least at times, to say no and to allow myself to be unpopular in the eyes of my teenager, but that I did set limits. If the answer to both of those are that you did set limits and were nurturing, the odds are strongly in your favor that your kid is going to turn out fine, and actually does work that way. At this point, I am going to stop and open for any kinds of questions or comments that people might have. Anybody? Questions? Comments?
I totally agree with everything you said about standing your ground and walking away so that they don't keep nagging you. But how do you physically keep them from doing what they want to do after you said no? So, for example, my son wanted to go down the street to play with his friends, and I said, no, you can't go because we have practice in a half an hour. He walked out the door and he went. So how am I supposed to prevent him from...
This is a really good question, because it really gets to what's real tough about teenagers, which is that you don't always win, and that some will push limits past what you're comfortable with. And the answer is, and most people find this not completely satisfying, which it's not, but it's the best that you got, which is you keep the rule in place. So the kid is now crossed over thing, and if he goes, he's going to come back, and I'm saying there's some situations that you call the police or something and run away, but if it's just going to a neighbor's house, that's not exactly what's going to do it. So that when the kid comes back, do you keep the rule in place? No. When I say you're not supposed to go out, you're supposed to follow the rule. That will have an effect on the kid. You also talk to them later and say, today when I asked you to come back, you didn't. That is not acceptable. If you want to add in some kind of a punishment, a lot of people are comfortable with that. And nowadays, there's available punishments, because they're so devoted to tiny screens and phones and that kind of thing, that has a little more clout than what there used to be. But even without, The rule is that you keep the rule in place. If you want to have a punishment, fine. It's not going to be completely effective, and there are going to be some times when they just flat out are going to defy you. Usually it's not about something that's going to place themselves at risk, and if it is where it's a real risk, then you have to get into other things. This is for sort of the day-to-day where they're crossing over lines that you never would have done. I said, no, you may not go out, watch me. And the thing that you don't want to do, and this is actually bring this up, that because it's probably the most serious mistake that parents can make in this, which is you do not want to put your body between, you don't want to physically restrain them if you're talking about teenagers. That is actually potentially dangerous, and there can be serious fights that develop from that. So that it's not like you want to, and parents do this, you're not going anywhere, you're standing there in the door, and the kid pushes by, wants to go, pushes by and isn't really doing anything, but the parent gets a little pushed off the feet, and then it can escalate into, as I said, it can escalate into really serious things. It's not something you don't want to, enforcing stuff with teenagers, you do not want to use your body as a means of enforcing it. I wasn't thinking of that, but that's an interesting thing, which is at the time, you're not going anywhere, mister, well, the kid's leaving. You then at that, I don't see anything wrong if you want to say, if you're leaving, that's a day, you're not. This is a good question. If it's a real quick thing and you're saying, no, you've just lost the phone for a day, end of story, and you'll discuss it. That I don't know why you would need to wait on that. If it's a real clear consequence that you can express quickly, and at which point they often will go ballistic. But you've said what you have to do, and at that point you disengage. And the escalating punishments. All right. That's another, you've just lost another thing on the phone. And this is played out, and this doesn't go to good places at all, because then the kid then gets madder, and the parent says, okay, that's another one. And the kid, and that's probably the most classic in America today, escalating, where you start tagging on for each thing that they say, rather than saying that's not okay. Anybody else? Where did the baby self go? Where it could get away with it. I mean, and that's seeking out any kind of situation where it has the freedom, or where it's going to get any kind of nurturing. But they definitely were sneakier. Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's another thing that kids have, and this is written about a lot, that kids have more freedom, and their parents will take more chances than they used to. And another thing, and I'll just mention this, because it's been very noticeable to me, that the first generation of people who really didn't have the "I'll wait until your father gets home" deal, I think there's absolutely no question that kids today, teenagers today, have nicer relationships with their fathers in the long run than they did. That there was a lot of there was an objection that the parents and the fathers took those roles. It was sort of wasn't the discussant. And I think that there is a generation of people who now have better relationships with their fathers than did the previous generations. Anybody else? then I think we'll stop. And I thank you all for coming.